Jake Miller couldn't stop fidgeting in his seat. The plastic chair squeaked every time he moved, and he was pretty sure Mrs. Thompson was getting annoyed with him. But he couldn't help it, that annoying tickle in his nose was getting worse by the minute. Now, when we mix these two chemicals together, Mrs. Thompson was saying, holding up two clear bottles, we get a reaction that produces heat and light. Jake barely heard her. His nose felt like someone had stuffed it with pepper and tiny needles. He pressed his finger under his nostrils, trying to stop what he knew was coming. Around him, 24 other 6th graders were taking notes or doodling in their notebooks. His best friend Tyler was making paper airplanes in the back row. The sneeze was building like a storm. Jake's eyes started watering, and he grabbed a tissue from his backpack. Mrs. Thompson continued her demonstration, completely unaware that her student was about to create his own explosive chemical reaction. Jake felt it coming. There was no stopping it now. Achoo. What happened next defied every law of physics Jake had ever learned in school. A massive stream of bright orange fire erupted from his mouth like he was some kind of human flamethrower. The flames were so hot and bright that everyone in the room had to shield their eyes. The fire shot across the classroom in a perfect straight line, hitting his plastic desk first. The desk didn't just melt, it completely vaporized. 1 second it was there, the next second it was just a puddle of bubbling plastic on the floor. The flames kept going, hitting the whiteboard behind Mrs. Thompson's head. The entire board turned black in an instant, and the metal frame started glowing red hot. The fire alarm went off immediately. The ear-splitting shriek filled the classroom as the sprinkler system kicked in, dumping gallons of cold water on everyone's heads. Kids started screaming and running in every direction, slipping on the wet floor as they tried to get to the door. Fire! Fire! Get out! Someone yelled. But Jake couldn't move. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at where his desk used to be. His hands were glowing with this weird inner light, like someone had put tiny light bulbs under his skin. Steam was rising from his fingertips, and he could feel heat radiating from his entire body. Mrs. Thompson stood there dripping wet, her mouth hanging open. Her perfectly organized lesson plan was scattered across the wet floor, and her hair was plastered to her head. She looked at Jake, then at the melted plastic, then back at Jake. Jake, she said slowly, her voice shaking. What just happened? Jake looked up at her, water dripping from his hair. His throat felt warm, like he'd been drinking hot cocoa, but way more intense. I don't know, Mrs. Thompson. I really don't know. Other teachers started rushing into the room. Mr. Davis from next door, Ms. Garcia from the office, even Principal Johnson came running. They all stopped dead when they saw the scene, the melted desk, the burned whiteboard, and Jake sitting in the middle of it all with his hands still glowing. Everyone out. Now. Principal Johnson shouted. Jake, you too. Come on. But Jake was scared to move. What if he breathed fire again? What if he hurt someone? He stood up slowly, keeping his mouth closed tight. The other kids gave him a wide circle as they filed out, whispering and pointing. Tyler was the last one to leave. He stopped at the door and looked back at his best friend. Dude, he whispered, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen. By lunchtime, someone had posted a video online. Jake's little brother had been recording Mrs. Thompson's experiment on his phone when the sneeze happened, and he'd caught the whole thing. The video spread faster than the fire Jake had breathed. Within 2 hours, it had been shared 1 million times. News trucks started showing up at the school. Reporters were calling Jake's mom at work. The video was on every social media platform with titles like Real Dragon Boy and Kid Breathes Fire at School. Jake's dad picked him up early from school, driving through crowds of reporters and curious neighbors. When they got home, 3 black SUVs were already parked outside their house. Men in dark suits and sunglasses stood on their front porch, looking very serious and very official. Mr. Miller, one of them said as Jake and his dad walked up. We're from the Department of Unexplained Phenomena. We need to talk to your son. 3 days had passed since Jake's fire-breathing incident, and life had become completely crazy. Government agents were camped outside their house, reporters wouldn't leave them alone, and Jake hadn't been able to go back to school. His parents were taking turns staying home from work to watch him, worried that he might accidentally set something else on fire. Jake was sitting in his bedroom, practicing breathing exercises that one of the government scientists had taught him, when he heard his neighbor Mrs. Peterson screaming outside. He ran to his window and looked out, expecting to see maybe a car accident or something normal like that. Instead, he saw something that made his brain struggle to process what his eyes were showing him. The entire sky was turning dark, but not from storm clouds. Huge shadows were moving across the sun, shadows that were way too big and the wrong shape to be airplanes. Mrs. Peterson stood in her driveway pointing up at the sky, her mouth wide open in shock. Jake pressed his face against the window glass and looked up. His heart nearly stopped beating. Dragons. Real, actual dragons were flying down from the clouds. Not the tiny lizard-like creatures from fairy tales, but massive beasts that looked like flying buildings. Their wings were so enormous they blocked out entire sections of the sky as they glided in perfect formation toward the ground. "Mom! Dad!" Jake yelled, running downstairs as fast as his legs could carry him. "You need to see this. There are dragons outside." His parents rushed to the living room window just as the largest dragon landed in the middle of the school football field across the street. The impact shook their entire house like a small earthquake. Car alarms started going off all over the neighborhood, and Jake could hear people screaming and running in every direction. The dragon was absolutely beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Its scales were deep red like fresh blood, but shot through with veins of bright gold that seemed to glow from within. It was easily the size of a jumbo jet, with wings that stretched across half the football field. When it folded its wings against its body, the sound was like thunder rolling across the sky. More dragons landed around it, smaller ones, but still huge. There was a silver one with blue markings, a black one with purple highlights, and several others in different colors. They formed a circle around the red dragon like bodyguards protecting their leader. Jake's dad, Tom, grabbed his arm. "Get away from the window, son. We don't know what they want." But Jake couldn't move. Something deep inside him was pulling him toward these creatures. It felt like recognition, like seeing a family member he'd forgotten he had. The warmth in his chest, the same warmth he'd felt right before breathing fire, was getting stronger. Then the red dragon's head turned, and its enormous golden eyes looked directly at their house. Directly at Jake. When the dragon spoke, Jake didn't hear the words with his ears. The voice appeared inside his mind, deep and ancient and powerful, like hearing the ocean speak. "I am Draken, elder of the fire courts. We have come for the awakened one, the boy who carries our ancient gift." People all over the neighborhood were running to their cars, trying to drive away, but they were all stuck because everyone had the same idea at the same time. Kids were crying, adults were shouting, and someone had called the police because Jake could hear sirens in the distance. But Jake felt calm for the first time in 3 days. He walked toward the front door. "Jake, no," his mom, Lisa, grabbed his other arm. "Don't go out there." His dad stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the door. Tom Miller wasn't a big man, but right now he looked ready to fight a dragon with his bare hands if he had to. "You're not taking my son anywhere." The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, and Jake could swear he saw something like amusement in those golden eyes. "Tom Miller," the voice said in all their minds, and Jake's parents jumped because they could hear it too. "Your courage honors the old ways. But I do not come to steal your child. I come to save him." Draken's gaze shifted back to Jake, and when their eyes met, Jake saw flashes of images in his mind. Humans and dragons flying together through space. Great cities built on floating islands. Battles against dark creatures among the stars. And throughout all of it, people who looked like Jake, breathing fire and standing between the two species like bridges. "Child of two worlds," Draken continued, his mental voice growing more urgent. "The blood of the old alliance flows in your veins. Your awakening signals the return of powers long thought lost. For 3,000 years, we have waited for one like you to be born again." Jake stepped around his father and opened the front door. The heat from the dragons washed over him like stepping into a warm bath, and every cell in his body seemed to wake up and sing. "But you are also in grave danger," Draken's voice grew darker. "The hunters have sensed your flame across the galaxy. Even now, their ships move toward your world. They will not stop until every fire breather is chained and caged." The warmth in Jake's chest suddenly turned cold. "Who are the hunters?" "An ancient enemy. They have spent millennia tracking down and enslaving our kind. Your awakening has painted a target on your entire planet." Jake looked back at his parents, then at the magnificent dragon before him. "What do I have to do?" Draken's golden eyes seemed to smile. "Learn who you really are." The high school gymnasium had never seen anything like this before. The basketball hoops had been raised to the ceiling, and folding chairs were arranged in messy rows facing a makeshift stage made of lunch tables pushed together. Government officials sat next to worried parents, while news crews tried to get the best camera angles of the massive red dragon who somehow fit inside the building despite being the size of a small airplane. Jake sat in the front row between his parents, feeling very small and very confused. 3 days ago, his biggest worry was passing his math test. Now he was apparently the most important person on Earth, and he had no idea why. Draken's enormous head rested on the gym floor, his golden eyes scanning the crowd of humans who had gathered to hear what he had to say. When he spoke, his voice filled everyone's mind at once, causing several people to jump in their seats. Your species has forgotten much, Draken began, his mental voice carrying a sadness that seemed to come from deep within time itself. But I remember when your ancestors first looked up at the stars and dreamed of touching them. We were there to help make those dreams come true. Principal Johnson, who was trying his best to act like having a dragon in his gymnasium was totally normal, cleared his throat. Can you be more specific? Our records don't show any evidence of humans and dragons working together. Draken's laugh rumbled through their minds like distant thunder. Your records go back mere thousands of years. I speak of times when your species was young and the galaxy was full of wonders you can barely imagine now. Images began flooding Jake's mind, not words, but actual pictures that felt more real than his own memories. He saw humans and dragons flying side by side through space, not in ships, but riding the dragons themselves through the cold vacuum between stars. He saw great cities built on floating islands, where people and dragons lived together as partners. He watched human children playing with baby dragons no bigger than house cats. We explored the galaxy together, Draken continued, and Jake realized the other people in the room were seeing the same visions he was. His mom gasped beside him, her hand flying to her mouth as she watched humans and dragons discovering new planets filled with incredible life forms. We shared our fire with you, and you shared your dreams with us. For millions of years, we built wonders that spanned entire solar systems. But then came the Great Sundering. The images in Jake's mind suddenly turned dark and terrifying. He saw massive black ships appearing out of nowhere, attacking the beautiful cities he'd just been admiring. He watched dragons falling from the sky while humans screamed and ran for cover. The partnership that had lasted for millions of years was being destroyed in what looked like days. A cosmic disaster that tore holes in reality itself, Draken explained. The barriers between dimensions collapsed, and our realm was pulled away from yours. In those final moments, as we felt ourselves being dragged into the shadow realm, we made a desperate choice. Jake's dad, Tom, leaned forward in his chair. What kind of choice? We left pieces of ourselves behind. Genetic markers hidden in certain human bloodlines, a gift that would stay dormant until the barriers between our worlds grew thin enough for us to return. Jake's mom, Lisa, pulled him closer to her side. Are you saying Jake isn't fully human? He is completely human, Draken replied, his golden eyes focusing on Jake with something that looked like pride. But he also carries the spark of dragon fire that we planted in his ancestors long ago. He is both species and neither, a bridge that can connect our worlds again. A man in a military uniform stood up in the back of the room. Why now? Why after all this time? Because he is the first firebearer born in 3,000 years, Draken said, and Jake felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. 4 centuries, we have watched and waited as the genetic markers passed from parent to child, growing weaker with each generation. We had begun to fear they were lost forever. Jake's hands started glowing again, that familiar warm light appearing under his skin. So when I sneezed fire in class. You announced your awakening to every sensitive being within 1,000 light-years, Draken finished. Including some who have spent millennia hunting our kind. The temperature in the gym seemed to drop 10 degrees as fear rippled through the crowd. Jake's mom held him even tighter. What do you mean, hunting? Draken's mental voice grew darker and more urgent. The Void Hunters. A species that has made it their mission to capture and enslave every fire-breathing being in the galaxy. They harvest our flame for their own purposes, keeping us in chains aboard their massive prison ships. Jake felt sick to his stomach. And they're coming here? Their scouts are already in your solar system. The main fleet will arrive within days. They will not stop until every dragon is captured and every human who carries the fire gift is dead or enslaved. The silence in the gymnasium was broken only by the sound of people shifting nervously in their chairs. Someone in the back was crying quietly. Jake stood up, his legs shaky but his voice surprisingly steady. What happens if I can't do whatever you need me to do? Draken looked directly into his eyes, and Jake saw the truth there before the dragon even spoke the words. Then both our species face extinction. Jake looked around the room at all the scared faces, his parents, his teachers, kids from school, government officials who were supposed to have all the answers but clearly didn't. They were all looking at him like he was their only hope. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Jake had never asked to be special, never wanted to be responsible for saving the world. But looking at his mom's frightened face and thinking about Tyler and all his other friends, he knew there was only one thing he could say. Jake nodded, trying to look braver than he felt. Okay. Teach me. The old airfield had been abandoned for 20 years, and it looked like it. Weeds grew through cracks in the runway, and the control tower windows were either broken or boarded up. But it was perfect for what they needed, a place where Jake could practice breathing fire without burning down half the town. Jake stood in the middle of the cracked concrete, facing a row of old metal drums that the military had set up as targets. His hands were already glowing with that familiar inner heat, and he could feel the fire building in his chest like a furnace getting ready to explode. Stop thinking so much, Draken's voice echoed in his mind. The massive dragon lay stretched out nearby, his red and gold scales gleaming in the morning sun. You're treating the fire like an enemy to be controlled. It's not. It's part of you. Jake took a deep breath and tried to relax, but it was hard when he could feel the power wanting to burst out of him like water from a broken dam. Every time I let it loose, it feels like I'm going to burn everything down. Because you're still thinking like a human, Draken replied patiently. Feel the flame, don't fight it. You are not just breathing fire, you are commanding the fundamental force of creation itself. That sounded way too important and scary for an 11-year-old kid, but Jake nodded anyway. He focused on the first metal drum, took another breath, and let the fire come. A stream of bright orange flame shot from his mouth, hitting the target dead center. The metal drum didn't just melt, it turned into liquid metal in seconds, then evaporated completely. Jake felt a rush of excitement and pride, but also something else. Something that felt ancient and powerful and not entirely his own. Yes, his best friend Tyler shouted from the sidelines, where he sat on an old crate with a bag of chips, watching the whole thing like it was the best movie ever made. Dude, you're literally the coolest person who ever lived. Jake grinned at his friend, but the smile felt different somehow. More confident than he'd ever been before, but also colder. He turned back to the targets and destroyed the next 3 drums without even thinking about it, the fire pouring out of him like he'd been doing it his whole life. His parents stood farther back, talking quietly with some of the government people who had been assigned to help with Jake's training. His mom kept glancing over at him with worried eyes, and Jake could tell she was upset about something. During their lunch break, she pulled him aside. Jake, honey, are you feeling okay? Lisa asked, reaching up to touch his forehead like she was checking for a fever. You seem different. Jake shrugged, not sure how to explain that he felt like he was becoming someone else. I'm fine, Mom. Just learning new stuff. But he wasn't fine. Every day of training made him feel more disconnected from his old life. The fire inside him was getting stronger, and with it came thoughts and memories that weren't his own. Sometimes he would look at his human hands and feel surprised that they weren't covered in scales. Sometimes he would dream about flying through space and wake up disappointed to find himself in his boring bedroom instead of soaring between stars. His dad, Tom, had been watching the training sessions with a grim expression. Jake could tell his parents were scared, not of the dragons or the coming war, but of what their son was becoming. The worst part was that Jake wasn't entirely sure he cared anymore. General Rebecca Hayes, the no-nonsense military officer who had been put in charge of coordinating between the humans and dragons, called everyone together for an emergency briefing. She was a tough-looking woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she didn't waste time with small talk. Satellite imagery shows the enemy fleet will arrive in 72 hours, she announced, pointing to a series of photographs spread out on a folding table. These ships are massive, each one is the size of a city. Whatever we're going to do, we need to be ready. Jake looked at the pictures and felt his stomach drop. The Void Hunter ships looked like giant metal insects, all sharp angles and dark surfaces that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. There were dozens of them, arranged in a formation that looked designed for one thing, capturing everything in their path. How are we supposed to fight those? Tyler asked, his voice much quieter than usual. Even he seemed to realize this wasn't a game anymore. Draken lifted his massive head, his golden eyes studying the photographs. We have faced the hunters before. They are powerful, but they have weaknesses. Their ships are built to capture fire breathers alive, not to fight against beings who can work together. Together, General Hayes repeated, looking between Jake and the dragons. What exactly does that mean? Jake stepped forward, and as he did, small flames began dancing between his fingers without him even trying to make them appear. It means I'm not just human anymore, and I'm not just dragon either. I'm something new. The fire spread up his arms, but it didn't burn him. Instead, It felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. When he spoke again, his voice carried an echo that hadn't been there before, like two people talking at the same time. The hunters have never faced a fire bearer, he continued, and part of him knew things he'd never learned, understood strategies that came from thousands of years of dragon memory. They don't know what I can do because nothing like me has existed for 3,000 years. His mom made a small, worried sound, and Jake looked over at her. For just a moment, seeing the fear in her eyes, he felt like himself again, just a scared kid who wanted to go back to worrying about homework and video games. But then he looked at the pictures of the hunter ships, and the fire inside him burned brighter. Tyler walked over and stood beside his best friend, even though Jake could tell the heat radiating from his body was uncomfortable. Whatever happens, we've got your back, man. Jake flexed his fingers, watching small flames dance between them like tiny pets. The human part of him was grateful for Tyler's friendship. The dragon part of him was already planning how to turn the hunter ships into floating scrap metal. Ready or not, the war was coming. And Jake Miller was no longer just the kid who had sneezed fire in science class. He was something much more dangerous than that. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon when the war for Earth began. Jake stood on the roof of his house, no longer needing a ladder to get up there. The fire inside him had changed his body in ways that still surprised him. He was stronger, faster, and could jump impossible distances without even thinking about it. Around him, 31 dragons filled the morning sky like a living storm cloud. Their wings blocked out huge sections of the rising sun, and when they all roared at once, every window in town rattled. Jake felt the sound in his bones, in his blood, in every cell of his body that had been touched by dragon fire. But it was the enemy ships that made his breath catch in his throat. The Void Hunter fleet hung in the sky like a disease, 12 massive vessels that looked like they'd been carved from solid darkness. Each ship was easily the size of a football stadium, covered in weird angles and surfaces that seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. They moved with a sick, oily grace that made Jake's stomach turn. "They're bigger than I thought they'd be," Tyler said from the ground below. His best friend was wearing a helmet and bulletproof vest that the military had given him, along with all the other civilians who refused to evacuate. They couldn't fight, but they'd insisted on staying to watch Jake's back. Jake's parents stood beside Tyler, holding hands and looking up at their son with a mixture of pride and terror that broke his heart. His mom had been crying on and off for the past hour, but she'd also helped him put on the weird armor that the dragons had made for him, scales woven together with human technology in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Remember," Draken's voice filled Jake's mind, steady and confident despite the impossible odds they faced. "You are the bridge between flame and strategy. Show them what humans and dragons can accomplish together." Jake nodded, feeling the fire build in his chest until it felt like his heart was made of molten gold. Around him, the dragons spread out in a formation that looked random but wasn't. He could see the strategy now, the way they were positioning themselves to attack from every angle while protecting the humans below. The hunter ships started moving, and Jake watched with growing horror as hundreds of smaller pods began dropping from their undersides like deadly rain. Each pod was designed to capture dragons alive, equipped with nets and restraints that could hold even the strongest fire breather. "They want to take us prisoner," Jake realized, his voice carrying to all the dragons at once through their mental link. "They don't want to kill us, they want to enslave us." "Then we make sure they fail," Draken replied, and Jake felt the ancient dragon's determination flow through him like liquid fire. Jake launched himself into the air, his human form already beginning to change. His skin took on a golden glow, his hands stretched into claws, and wings of pure flame erupted from his back. He wasn't becoming a full dragon, he was becoming something that had never existed before, a perfect fusion of human intelligence and dragon power. He dove toward the largest hunter ship like a falling star, moving faster than any dragon could fly. The enemy vessel tried to turn its weapons on him, but Jake was too small and too fast. He slammed into the ship's hull with the force of a missile, his flame-wreathed body punching through the alien metal like it was made of cardboard. Inside the ship, Jake found something that made his rage burn even hotter. Cages. Hundreds of them, filled with creatures from across the galaxy, dragons, fire salamanders, phoenix birds, and dozens of species he didn't recognize. All of them had been captured and imprisoned, their flames slowly being drained away by horrible machines. "Not anymore," Jake whispered, and his fire exploded outward in every direction. The ship began tearing itself apart from the inside as Jake's flames melted through every system at once. He burst back out through the hull just as the entire vessel started falling toward the ocean below, already beginning to break apart in midair. Around him, the battle was going better than anyone had dared to hope. The dragons weren't just fighting, they were working with human military forces in ways that confused and overwhelmed the hunters. Fighter jets flew alongside ancient dragons, their combined attacks hitting the enemy from angles they'd never encountered before. Ground-based missiles guided by dragon sight found targets that human technology couldn't track. Jake threw himself at the next hunter ship, his human mind calculating weak points while his dragon instincts told him exactly how much fire would be needed to exploit them. Ship after ship fell from the sky, some exploding in brilliant fireballs, others simply crashing into the ocean as their systems failed. But it was the last ship that almost killed him. The hunter commander had figured out that Jake was the key to everything, and every weapon on the massive vessel turned toward him at once. Energy beams that could have leveled a city block converged on the spot where Jake was flying, and for a terrifying moment he thought he was going to die. Then Draken was there, his massive body shielding Jake from the worst of the attack. The ancient dragon roared in pain as the energy beams burned through his scales, but he held his position until Jake could recover. Together, Draken said, his mental voice weak but determined. Jake nodded and placed his hands against Draken's scales. The fire inside him flowed into the dragon, and Draken's flame flowed into Jake. For a moment, they weren't two separate beings, they were something bigger and more powerful than either could be alone. Their combined fire lance struck the hunter ship's center and went straight through it like a sword through paper. The vessel hung in the air for a heartbeat, then split in half and fell burning toward the sea. When the smoke cleared, Jake found himself standing on the beach where he'd played as a little kid. His body was slowly changing back to human form, though he could still feel the fire sleeping just under his skin, ready to wake up whenever he needed it. His parents reached him first, running across the sand like their lives depended on it. His mom crashed into him so hard they both almost fell over, and Jake could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Jake looked up at the sky, where the last pieces of the hunter ships were still falling like dark snow. But beyond that, he could see something that made his heart soar. New lights were appearing among the familiar stars, not planets or comets, but entire worlds that were crossing back into their dimension for the first time in thousands of years. "No, Mom," Jake said, watching dragon cities appear in the sky like jewels scattered across black velvet. "It's just beginning." Tyler punched him in the arm, grinning like an idiot. "So what happens now? Do you become king of the dragons or something?" Jake laughed, and small flames danced around his fingers as he did. He was still 11 years old. He still had homework waiting for him at home. But he was also something entirely new, the first bridge between two species that were meant to explore the stars together. The age of dragons and humans had begun again, and Earth would never be the same.